Thanks for the kind introduction. The soldiers looked up at Goliath and they whispered to each other, "He's so big, we can't win." David, on the other hand, looked at the giant and he said, "He's so big, I can't miss." 3,000 years later, David would have been called an entrepreneur today, because that's what us entrepreneurs do. We take on the Goliaths. I want to talk about growing a startup and the key principles that have been really helpful for us. But before I do, I just want to jump in and give you a brief introduction to what DealDash is, for those of you who are not familiar. DealDash is an e-commerce company that serves customers in the US with deals on consumer electronics, kitchen appliances, video games, toys, and gift cards. We took the traditional pay-to-play auction model, took out the risk and the downside of losing, and added game mechanics to it. In short, we have about 2.5 million customers in the US. We're the world's most talked about Facebook brand, beating Coca-Cola, Walmart, Amazon, and eBay on engagement. And we've also been able to grow transactional revenue from 0 to 44 million last year, and we continue to grow this year and going forwards. One of the unique things with the pay-to-play auction space is the barriers to entry are quite low. So we have tracked more than 1,000 competitors in the last 5 years in our space. And the space itself has attracted more than $250 million of venture capital from some of the top-tier VCs in the Silicon Valley area and in the Boston area. Also, some angel investors like Eric Schmidt, Google's former CEO, invested in our space. So we know firsthand what it was like to go up against companies that had fantastic teams and a lot of more funding than we did. And I'll talk about that. So that's a brief intro to DealDash. Hope you visit our website. The 4 key principles that we think aren't getting enough attention are the following. The first one is don't delay. So I started DealDash when I was 16 years old in my bedroom in Helsinki. And a lot of people asked me, like, why would you quit school and start DealDash, a US-focused e-commerce company from Finland? And my answer to that would be, I couldn't wait for success, so I went ahead without it. Essentially, we jumped out of the plane without knowing how to get the parachute open, and we've learned it as we've gone along. But it doesn't only apply to startups. I know many of us are in the same situation, but it applies to new products, new features, and new customers. So there's not going to come a time and place when we have all the information we need. We just have to move really fast. I think it was Sennström that said yesterday that it's the fast that beat the slow. So don't delay. The second principle, which was really helpful for us, was to start in the US. Go global from the very beginning. Now, I'd only visited the US twice before I started DealDash there, and there's no family connections. We didn't have any Americans on the team. We were just a bunch of Finnish entrepreneurs who kind of realized that all the customers were in the US. And then we started learning about the American customers, and we started calling them and meeting them, and we learned a lot by doing that. And I think you can really start a company in Helsinki or wherever you're based, and you can go to any market as long as you're really open-minded and you keep on learning about the customers there and what they care about. But there are certainly disadvantages as well. But the key is not to focus on those. So people would say to us, well, what about the time zone difference? How do you deal with time zones? And we'd say, well, that's great, because every day we go to work, and we've been working in the office for 7 hours before competitors have even finished breakfast. And do the math, 365 times 7 hours, it adds up over time, right? So we kept thinking in these terms, and I think what Henry Ford said is whether you believe you can or you can't, either way you're right. So going global first made a lot more sense for us. But as we did, we also learned new things, and we were really naive. I mean, we didn't know anything about America. In fact, I didn't know that you had to be 21 to buy a beer legally. And probably if I would have known that, we would have looked at other markets. So being naive can also be really helpful when making a decision like this. The third principle, and like a senior entrepreneur once told me this, and I've used it to great advantage, is to use VCs as a sounding board. So raise non-diluting capital. I'm not talking about grants or debt. I think those are probably great options to look at. But what I'm talking about, at DealDash, we raised $3 million of equity from venture capitalists and angel investors. So those that invested in us put us $3 million in. But I would argue that the people that didn't invest in DealDash have given us at least $3 million of free advice. And this doesn't show up in the balance sheet, but it sure shows up in the bottom line. And I'll tell you how it works. So we'll sit down with a VC and we'll say, what are the key concerns that you have about this business? And most of the time they'll tell us, like, here are the things we're really worried about, here are the things we think you need to work on. And we'll write those things down and we'll go back to the team and drawing board and figure out how do we deal with those things. So if we hired McKinsey or another consulting group to pay millions of dollars to them to do this type of work for us, I don't think we'd be getting the same amount of value that we've gotten from just talking to VCs and the feedback that we've gotten. So that's been really helpful for us. So raise non-diluting capital in terms of free advice. The fourth principle is to really think about where you're spending your money. And that seems really obvious. Of course you're going to do that. But what I found is, as the business changes, it evolves, it grows. Many of the things you were doing in the past are no longer relevant, but you keep on spending money there. Or maybe you're looking at an industry benchmark. And what we found was that we had to kind of question everything. So when we have new employees that join DealDash, many times I tell the story of how this old man who had trouble hearing he went to the store and he wanted to buy a hearing aid. And the store clerk came out with a $2,000 hearing aid equipment. And he said, well, that's kind of expensive. Do you have something a bit more affordable? So she came back after a while and she brought the $600 hearing aid equipment. And again, the old man said, well, don't you have anything cheaper than this? And that's when she brought out the $2 hearing aid equipment. And the $2 one was just simply a shirt button with a piece of loose string attached to it. And the old man looked at it and said, what kind of joke is this? And the sales clerk said, well, just put the button in your ear and take the thing and put it in your pocket somewhere. I said, well, does it work? And she said, well, of course it doesn't work. It's a shirt button. But people will talk a lot louder to you when they see you wearing it. So the old man walked out with a $2 device and he had the same benefit. And of course, he didn't have to charge it and it was waterproof and so on and so on. But I think there are a lot of opportunities like this in startups. And even as we grow the company and the business model evolves, we need to look at opportunities where we can get the same result at a fraction of the price. So those, I think, are the four key principles that don't get enough attention, especially the one about talking to venture capitalists. In this very room, there's a lot of free, non-diluting capital in the terms of free advice that we can get from VCs. So take advantage of that. I want to end with a story about entrepreneurship and what it's like being an entrepreneur. I think a lot of us can relate to this. A young entrepreneur passed away, and St. Peter came down and he met the guy and he said, you've been an entrepreneur for such a short amount of time. I can't say if you should be placed into hell or if you should go to heaven. And he said, why don't you make the decision? And the young entrepreneur said, well, can I see both and I'll make a better informed decision? Sure. So we went to hell and they looked around and the young entrepreneur saw a bunch of men and women chained together working 80-hour weeks and under immense pressure. And every hour there'd be a guy that comes with a stick and he beats them up. And the young entrepreneur says, this is not what I signed up for. Take me to heaven right away. So they go to heaven, and it's exactly the same situation. But here, in fact, it's not just once every hour a guy comes with a stick. There's like 5 guys that comes with a stick every hour and beats them up. And so, I don't get it. I thought this was supposed to be heaven. And St. Peter says, well, young entrepreneur, this is heaven. You don't get it. These guys got funded. So being an entrepreneur can be tough from time to time. And whether you're funded or not, the work continues. But being David and taking on Goliath isn't easy, but it's very important. And I think we can all agree that we wouldn't trade places with anyone. Thank you very much.